Hi, I'm Marilyn Gladu, Member of Parliament for Sarnia-Lambton, and I'm running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. I'm going to be bringing out some bold new policies, and you're going to want to see these coming out to you in the next few weeks.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Post Millennial podcast. We have a really exciting guest with us today, and that's Marilyn Gladu, who's running to be the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and hopefully Prime Minister after that. We're here today to get an introduction to you and to learn more about your policies. And we're all really excited that you're here. So I think to start off, it's been a pretty hectic 24 hours in Conservative politics or Canadian politics, where we had a Liberal minister sort of rolled out of bed to say that all media is going to have to enlist and get a license with the Canadian government. And then after that, almost 24 hours after, he comes back again and says, actually, that's not what we're doing. I don't know what I was saying. I was misspoken. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, clearly Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have no idea what they're doing in the media. Originally, they started trying to bribe the media with $600 million in an election year. And then the next thing you know, we're going to require them to have a license from us. And then, no, we're not going to require them to have a license for us. So they don't have a plan. What we need to do with the media in Canada is to make sure that there's a fair and competitive playing field. And, let the media do their work. Let them have their freedom of the press. That's a core principle for Canadians.
Do you think there's an uncompetitive playing field for the media?
I do. I think CBC, originally their scope was to provide Canadian content to rural and remote places. And we've seen that the government's given them billions and billions. And now they've grown to the part where they're getting advertising dollars and they're making it difficult for other industry to compete. And
despite the CBC receives billions of dollars in taxpayer money each year. And now we found out in a recent report that less than 1% of Canadians are actually watching it. And they now want to stop producing Canadian shows altogether. And I think it was Brian Lilly who mused, isn't that the point of having a CBC?
Yes, absolutely. That was their original mandate, to provide Canadian content to rural and remote places. And so, the ideal thing would be for them to produce Canadian content and perhaps get into Netflix and let Canadian content be seen all over the world.
Yeah. Well, how would you address these issues with the CBC? What would you want to do?
I would conduct a review of their mandate, because I believe at this point the amount of money that they're receiving and the advertising dollars that they're getting as well are making it uncompetitive for other industries. So we need a fair and competitive playing field, and reviewing their mandate and setting those rules in place so that everyone can bring the freedom of the press with a fair playing field. That's what I would do.
You brought up the media bailout, which I think was to the tune of about $600 million. Again, a massive sum of taxpayer money. We recently saw Erin O'Toole come out and say that he would scrap the media bailout altogether. Would that be something you would also consider?
Absolutely. This was totally inappropriate, especially in an election year. It gives at least the perception that the media is being influenced to kindly reflect the Liberal government, which, I believe they did.
Yeah, you think there's a bias in the mainstream media?
I do think that that's what I saw in the election when I watched the content that was being played. So I think that if it's taxpayer dollars, it should be a nonpartisan objective reporting.
What do you think about Rosemary Barton deciding to sue the Conservative Party in the middle of an election, and yet considering to report on the actual election as well?
Well, I think this is totally not a consistent standard, because, there have been other cases similar that the Liberals did, and they did nothing to them. So again, we're seeing a bias.
So if we may look at the whole landscape as a whole, what prompted you to run for the Conservative leadership contest?
Well, I believe that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal policies are destroying our country. They've ruined the economy in the West. I believe that, what they're doing in terms of pitting one group of Canadians against another, really eroding the freedoms of the country. So what we need to do is get Justin Trudeau out of office. And to do that, the Conservatives have to win. And in order to win, they have to enlarge the base. And in order to do that, we need two things. We need a strong, dynamic leader that can win the hearts of Canadians, and we need a better policy that's a balance of fiscal responsibility and social compassion. Canadians love what Conservatives do in terms of reduced taxes, growing the economy, creating jobs, balancing the budget, but increasingly they're looking for help with our healthcare system, a credible climate change plan, and compassion for people that are struggling, like seniors that can't afford to live and people that can't afford their prescription medications, people caught in the affordable housing crisis, and veterans that are homeless. These are things that Canadians want us to address. And so Conservatives are good at bringing effective cost solutions that will actually help people, but we haven't wanted to talk about that. And I think that balance of policy and a strong leader is what we need to win.
So what stopped the Conservatives from winning last election?
Well, I would say it was a combination of issues with leadership and issues with our policy. The policy that we came out with did not resonate with Canadians, and we saw a lot of negativity, especially on the environmental part of the plan, the climate change plan. And we know that Andrew Scheer struggled in Quebec especially, bringing as his message. He seemed to be uncomfortable talking about abortion, talking about the LGBTQ. And, Canadians are at a place where, these things shouldn't be what we're focusing on. We have bigger problems in the country, and a leader has to stand up for the rights and freedoms of every Canadian.
Would you consider yourself a social conservative?
No, I would consider myself someone that's going to stand up for the rights and freedoms of everyone. I'm a Christian myself, but I recognize there are people that have other perspectives, and we need to treat one another respectfully and stop pitting one group against another. It's not a question of one group having their rights and freedoms and another group not. I mean, we all as Canadians need to have our individual freedoms, and so we have to respect the rights of others.
Yeah, so I think, to borrow a quote from Peter MacKay, he said that social conservatism hung around the Conservatives' neck like a stinking albatross. And I think that's an important point to take in. But recently you said that we should allow people like Richard Dickory, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name right there, to run for Conservative leadership, despite saying that being gay was a choice.
No, I didn't say that he should be able to run. I said the committee would decide. He's actually offside with party policy, so I don't believe that the committee will decide to let him run. But his comments were offensive. It's not that you can't have a different point of view. We have 33% of the party that's social conservatives. But honestly, there's another part of the party that has a different view. And we can all have those different views. It's a big tent party, but we have to treat one another respectfully. And I think everyone agreed that wasn't the tone that he brought.
Well, speaking of official policy, the Post Millennial found out today that Peter MacKay wouldn't immediately move, or he wouldn't commit to moving the Israeli embassy or the Canadian embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Does that mean that Peter MacKay, like Richard Dickory, faces a challenge of actually being able to run the leadership?
Well, he's already been vetted by the party at this point in time, so they've lost that opportunity unless they revoke it. But clearly he's offside. We have said that we would move the embassy to Jerusalem. It's the capital of Israel, and that is the party position.
So you brought up climate change, and I think you have quite an interesting approach to climate change, where you say you wouldn't necessarily scrap the carbon tax altogether, but would give autonomy to the province. And I think you told the CBC that you would bring a science-based approach to climate change. Surely the carbon tax is a manner in which we can fight climate change, and scrapping it entirely or giving it to the provincial jurisdiction is in a way unscientific.
No, that's not true, because actually a carbon tax is a very ineffective way to get a reduction. We see that BC has had a carbon tax for 10 years and they've only reduced by 1%. Quebec has had cap and trade for a similar amount of time and their emissions are flat. Europe has had carbon tax for 19 years and they've only reduced 8%. And so, you're putting a lot of punishment in terms of affordability on poor individuals that have to heat their homes and drive, and it's not effective. It's certainly not going to meet the Paris targets. So what we need is a science-based plan. I'm a chemical engineer by background, and so Canadians want to see where are the emission reductions going to happen. And so if you look, there's a list of top 25 emissions in Canada, and they're in three groups: the major industrial emitters, transportation, and buildings. And in order to actually get the reduction, I would adopt a model that was successfully used in the US in the refinery business, where they combined regulatory targets with an incentive so that the company, if they actually purchased and installed the technology to reduce emissions, they'd receive a tax credit that would, offset the cost. And if they didn't, then they paid the penalty of the regulatory target. And so it drove people to do the right thing and actually reduce emissions, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, well, wonderful. You talked a bit about the alienation of Western Canada. And almost immediately after Justin Trudeau's re-election, we saw an immediate rift between Western Canada and Ontario and Quebec. How would you repair this rift? How would you fix this Western separatist movement that's now rising up?
Well, their economy has been decimated by Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. And so the way to restore happiness to the West is to restore their economy, the oil and gas business, and I would argue the natural resource sector, things like softwood lumber that we've been 5 years without a contract and have very punishing tariffs from the U.S. Restoring that economy is going to be key. Getting the oil and gas to the West Coast will restore that relationship. And I don't think that we should be pitting one part of the country against another part. Every part of the country is valuable, and I think that once we are all in prosperity, that we will live in more harmony.
Well, the issue is, don't you think in some ways by supporting the oil-producing organisations in Alberta, that will some way inhibit your plans to reach the Paris targets?
No, it actually increases the amount of carbon sinks that you have to have. So you have to do more technology like carbon sequestration, planting trees, etc., and do further emissions reduction. But you can't shut the economy down to eliminate Canadian footprint, because our carbon footprint's only 1.6% of the whole world. We could eliminate the whole thing, and it's not going to fix the problem. And so we can't destroy our economy and not fix the climate change problem at the same time. We've got to do both. We've got to restore prosperity, and that means we're going to have to be more innovative about finding additional emissions reductions and leveraging Canada's technology and our natural resources to the rest of the world, because there are places like China and India, the US, and the emerging economies that are building 453 coal plants that are the major part of the carbon footprint. And we can bring our technology and, for example, our LNG. If we supplanted one coal plant with LNG, that reduces the carbon footprint by a factor of 5. And so there are things that we can do to lead here at home and in the rest of the world.
I noticed on Twitter that you were very, very quick to point out the fact that you had a firearm license.
Yes, Rick Peterson put a Super Bowl challenge out to indicate that he said, I'll make you a bet. I bet I'm the only leadership candidate that has their gun license. And so I replied quickly, wrong, I have my restricted and non-restricted PAL, and so you lose the bet first.
Right, so as a licensed firearm owner, what do you think of Justin Trudeau and Bill Blair's policy to force through a gun ban?
I'm totally opposed to it. You see, the problem in Canada, 95% of gun crime is guns used illegally or illegal guns. And putting laws in place doesn't work because criminals don't obey the law. So, for example, if you put a handgun ban in place, the criminals don't obey that. They still have their handguns. And so it doesn't work. What we really need to do is the more difficult task of preventing illegal guns from coming into the country, and putting in place stiffer punishments on people that are especially repeat gun offenders, that we have a lot of organized crime in the country, and take away the guns. When they are convicted of a crime, those guns shouldn't be returned.
How do you stop firearms coming into the from the US border?
Well, we do have our custom border services, and there is a certain amount of inspection activity. But I think we need to partner up with the U.S. because the U.S. is watching this activity. Obviously, they're concerned, and we need to do that.
So who do you think is your biggest competitor in this leadership election? Who are you most worried about?
Well, I'm not worried about anyone. I'm here to present some great policy, have healthy discussion, and hopefully win the race, but it's the membership that will decide. I think that the membership realizes the task at hand is to enlarge the base, and so the question for them is, who can do that? Do we take Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole, who may be seen as the same old, or do we look for a fresh face and a fresh vision?
Right. But a lot of commentators have said, well, they firstly said that it was a coronation for Peter MacKay. Now they're saying it's a two-way race between Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole. How would you respond to that? What are your chances realistically of winning the leadership election?
Well, anything can happen in politics. And if we just turn the clock back a few weeks ago, we would have said Pierre Poilievre would be a leading contender. And then all of a sudden, instantly, he's not in the race anymore. So I think that while I may be the dark horse, I would not give up the race until it's over.
Of course. And on the subject of border crossing, or let's use border regulation, at the moment we have tens of thousands of illegal border crossers coming into Canada. And then through red tape and bureaucracy, they haven't been sent home, despite being ordered to be deported. How do we solve this gridlock? It seems emblematic of government these days, where we just can't achieve anything.
Well, obviously we need to fix the Safe Third Country Agreement to make sure that people that cross anywhere, have to go to regular border crossings and can't be crossing illegally. I think it's worthy of note that they're not crossing everywhere in Canada. They're only crossing in Manitoba and Quebec. And that's because they instantly get free legal aid and free medical. And instead of setting up help to bring them across the border, I would say there should be a checkpoint at Roxham Road where the people would be evaluated, because 50% of them that are coming are not eligible to be refugees and they could be turned back immediately. And then for the rest that are here, it's ridiculous the length of the queue. We may have to support these people for up to 4 years in order to process them. And that clearly it's better to increase the number of government resources to process them than to pay for their lodging and food when we know 50% of them will be sent back.
So would you cut legal aid and health aid for refugees coming into or across the border?
Well, those are things that are currently under provincial jurisdiction, so the federal government doesn't have anything to say. What I would say is we would fix the Safe Third Country Agreement. We would deport those that have been evaluated and thought to not fit the criteria. And we would also increase the resources to finish processing those that remain, because it's more expensive to pay to keep them than it is to process them.
Okay. You have been vocal in the past of your opposition towards marijuana. And there's a particular instance in 2017 which stands in the mind. But I was wondering whether your policy on marijuana has changed, whether you wouldn't repeal any laws. Would you change the current Trudeau legislation with marijuana?
No, I mean, obviously the marijuana implementation has been a disaster. They did not get rid of organized crime. They did not keep it out of the hands of children. And they lost money selling drugs, which only the Liberals can do. So I would say that for me, I was the shadow health minister, and my job was to take the official party position, which put me in a difficult position in my own riding, because 61% of the people in my riding at that time had voted for a party that would decriminalize or legalize. What I would say is that we need to address all of the points that I brought up. The harms to mental health for people. We already are underfunded in mental health. Driving impaired. There needs to be a high campaign of public awareness in order to make sure that we're not seeing the increase that we already have seen. And we need to be protecting workers in the workplace. Currently, there is nothing to protect employers who have all the liability and can't really do anything about testing their employees randomly in Canada.
So you would allow, I seem to remember that they deemed that unconstitutional in Newfoundland to test your workers who are riding helicopters. Would you change that? Would you go against the Constitution? I
think that there have been several precedent-setting cases, one with the TTC in Toronto and another one with Suncor in the West, where they have allowed the employers to test because of the prevalence of people being high at work. Obviously, in safety-critical industries, we don't want to have people that are high driving planes, driving trains, operating nuclear facilities, etc.
So you'd bring in testing?
I think that if we look at what happens in the states, in the places where the states have legalized, people are able to randomly test their employees. In fact, when I worked for Dow Chemical, I had an office in Midland, Michigan, and when I went there, I was subject to those criteria as well.
Right. So last election, and I think the election before that as well, the Trudeau government talked enormously about cutting cell phone bills in Canada. And we haven't really seen any lowering of the prices. They're still extortionate, really, the prices I have to pay just to connect to the bloody Wi-Fi. And I'm wondering, what would you do to help that? Would you seek to, say, invite US companies into Canada to bring down the price?
I think if you have more competition, you always get lower price and better service. So that's certainly a free market direction that I favor. What I would say about the Trudeau government is they're always all talk, no action. They always bring in lots of promises in the election and then they achieve hardly any of them.
If you became Prime Minister, would you seek to balance the budget?
I will seek to balance the budget, but I think that Canadians have said they have services that are important to them that they don't want to see cut. We are in such a mess of spending right now. It will take some time to sort it out. So I think that needs to be done in an orderly way and not just in a massive cut way. Right.
Final question. What are your thoughts about assisted dying in Canada? Would you, actually, I'm not entirely sure what the current state of it is, but are you pro or con? Would you allow that to continue or invite it to happen?
Well, it's the law right now that it's allowed, and the state of the nation is that Quebec has actually in the courts challenged the reasonable foreseeable death provision. And that has now gone to the higher court and looking for the government of Canada actually to respond by March and say whether or not they're going to adjust the legislation. Other issues that are under consideration are advanced directives and consent for mature minors or people that are not mentally competent to give consent. So those are the things the government has asked for reports on. They will be considering them, and we look forward to seeing what legislation has come forward. But assisted dying, the Supreme Court did rule that that is a provision that needs to exist, and the law is now in place.
What's your message to Conservative Party members who may be watching this?
My message is that I'm going to bring a better balance of fiscal responsibility. I'm a strong and dynamic leader that can win the hearts of Canadians, expand the base, and lead us to victory in the next election. And I'm going to stand up for the rights and freedoms of every Canadian. So make sure you take out your membership to the Conservative Party at www.conservative.ca. You can donate to my campaign. You can vote for me, and I encourage you to do so.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. Thank you for coming to Montreal.
Thank you.
And you're welcome back anytime.
Excellent. I'll come again.
Well, brilliant. Perfect.